September 2376. Oahu. Andrea McKinley was 14 years old. She was a native Hawaiian, but because her father James was Scottish and Caucasian, her skin was lighter than usual. Andrea had her mother's brown eyes and her father's black hair. Because she had gotten a haircut yesterday, her hair was currently short. Right now, she was sitting on her bed and looking at a photo. On the photo she was holding were her Uncle Remus and his girlfriend Quinn. Quinn had horns, wings, and a tail. She was an Iorian. Today, she and Remus were getting married. But it had been a school day, so Andrea and her brothers had not been able to go, but her mother Kalani had gone, so Andrea and her brother were spending the night with Grandma Hoku. That meant sleeping in the attic, which was a big room with 4 beds. Andrea put the photo down and frowned. She had seen the news feeds. She knew that the Iorian Empire had been running horrible experiments as part of something called Project Z, and that Aunt Quinn had been one of the subjects. Her Uncle Paul had also told her that Quinn had ended up with 6 children, all girls, because of these experiments. And that was what Andrea's frown was about. What were her cousins like? She had heard some pretty weird stories about Iorians over the years. It was at this point that Grandma Hoku entered the room, an elderly woman with kind eyes. She was carrying a small device with an integrated microphone. Andrea recognized it immediately. Her father, James McKinley, was a Commodore in the Global Defense Fleet. He was in command of a big cruiser called the HMS Lexington. And once a month, her mother was allowed to send him a message, and James would send a message back, telling them about his ship and adventures. But her mother had been in such a hurry to get to the wedding that she had forgotten the recorder. "We can't just skip the month," Hoku said. "I think you and your brothers should make a recording this time." "About what?" "About whatever is worrying you." "I'm not worried." "Tell that to your face," Hoku snickered. "You know, rumor has it that dads, well, at least the good ones, can be really good listeners, and sometimes they have a pearl of wisdom or two." Andrea nodded and took the recorder. She pressed the record button and began telling about how her mother had forgotten the recorder. Then she began telling a story she had heard from a classmate called Tommy in school. It was about a boy called Marcus Chen. Andrea's story. Marcus Chen was 12 years old. He lived in Washington, D.C., and only 3 houses away from the Iorian embassy. It was a strange, crystalline building that seemed to have grown out of the ground instead of having been built. Marcus had heard all sort of strange stories about the place. And at night, it glowed with a rainbow of colors. Marcus was in his bedroom, unable to sleep. He looked at the clock as it ticked past midnight. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep again. But even with the curtains closed, he kept seeing that strange light from the embassy behind his eyelids. He had complained to his parents, but they hadn't listened. Instead, they had been more busy with the divorce Marcus knew they were getting ready to tell him about. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He jumped out of bed and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer in his desk. Then he stomped down the stairs and out the front door. His parents were too busy arguing in the living room to notice, but he was beyond caring. Which was also why Marcus didn't notice the door closing behind him. He kept stomping until he reached the outside of the embassy. Then he pounded on the building. "Turn off that stupid light," he yelled. "I have a biology test in the morning and I want to sleep." There was no answer, but then suddenly there was a loud hiss. By the time Marcus realized what was happening, it was already too late. There was strange and green gas coming from tiny vents in the building. It surrounded him and he coughed, trying to clear the gas from his lungs. But it was already too late. His knees buckled and his head swam. Then the world went black. And when he woke up, he was somewhere inside the embassy. It was a strange room with crystal walls, but he couldn't see that much of it. This was because he was on his back on some big metal slab, and there were shackles around his wrists and ankles. They were attached to chains that tied him to the metal plate. Surrounding him were Iorians, male and females. All of them were wearing fancy clothes, but one of them, a female, was wearing a crown, so she was clearly the one in charge. "What is going on?" The Iorian female with the crown leaned over him. She smiled, her teeth looking like those of a T-Rex, and his stomach dropped. "Oh, yes," she said. "He is young. He will taste nice, especially with mushroom gravy." "No," Marcus screamed. "Awahoo." "And that is what happened to Marcus Chen," Andrea said into the recorder. "He got eaten. His parents thought he had figured out they were getting a divorce and ran away. He is still listed as missing. Nobody ever even looked at the embassy. The only reason this story came out is because the embassy's janitor felt guilty for eating Marcus. One day, he went to a bar and got drunk, told the barkeep the whole thing, and that barkeep is Tommy's dad." "That would never happen," Paul said as he entered the room with his brothers Remus and Samuel. "Yeah," Remus added. "There are spies watching the embassy all the time, they would have seen. Besides, I've seen pictures of the Iorian embassy on Earth. It's a normal brick building. Alien crystal buildings are only a thing in cliché science fiction stories." Paul and Remus were both 12 years old, they were twins, and had been named after Andrea's uncles, so officially they were Remus Jr. and Paul Jr. Behind them was Samuel, who was 10 years old. He had been named after James' grandfather. Samuel McKinley had been a doctor. Andrea had seen pictures. He had been a man with a kind smile and warm eyes. If she ever got to travel in a time machine, he was the one person she would go to meet. But right now, she was here and annoyed at her brothers. "Really? You know better. Okay, you tell Dad what really happened, Mr. Wise Guy." "Okay," Paul sat down next to Andrea. "So, here's what really happened, Dad. Oh, Andrea has a crush on a boy called Frank Peters. She thinks Mom doesn't know, but Mom and I saw her kiss Frank on the cheek after her piano les. Oh," Andrea had punched him. "Anyway, it wasn't Marcus Chen. It was Jake Morrison." Paul's story. Jake Morrison lived across from the Iorian embassy. The Morrisons were a rich family, which was why his parents could afford one of the big houses near the place. Jake was 10 years old, with green eyes and short blonde hair. He was in his bed, unable to sleep. His parents were away. Morrison Pharma Inc. was a big company that made medication. And once a year, all the shareowners meet for a big party to celebrate how much money they had made since the last party. It sounded horribly boring to Jake. He climbed out of bed and began pacing. There was nobody else in the house, so he knew there wouldn't be any complaints about the noise he made. Then he peeked through the curtains. The embassy was busy with all sorts of people in fancy clothes. It looked like the same kind of boring party his parents were attending, but he had never seen an Iorian with his own eyes, so he was curious. First, he put on a bathrobe, then he grabbed a flashlight and his copy of the keys to the house. He put the keys in a pocket and headed for the front door. Jake waited until the guards were looking away, then opened the door. He closed it carefully, then pretended to go on a walk down the street. As soon as he was out of view of the guards, he climbed over the fence. Then he proceeded to sneak towards the building. As soon as there was an unguarded moment, he slipped inside and gasped. The building was 10 times as fancy as his home. Alien writing lit up the walls. Lamps made out of crystal grew all over the place. It was slow going, but he made it to what appeared to a massive ballroom. People, humans and Iorians, were dancing to classical music. He was about to sneak inside when a big, strong hand grabbed his shoulder. Looking up, he saw an Iorian in lab coat. Beyond her could say anything, there was a sharp pain in his shoulder. Then his head went heavy and his vision blurry. When it cleared, he was tied to a hospital bed. It was in a windowless closet somewhere in the embassy. There was medical equipment and supplies all around him. The Iorian doctor was standing over him with a very nasty smile, and he was holding some kind of saw. "A human cub," he said, his evil smile growing wider. "I've always wanted one of those to dissect. This is going to be fun." The doctor turned on the saw, and Jake began screaming. "Awahoo." "Oh, please," Remus said. "That's even more ridiculous than her story. There would totally be an alarm on that fence. Besides, a human kid wandering through a party like that would stick out like a sore thumb. And dissecting somebody takes time. Somebody would have noticed the doctor not being at the party." "And what about Jake's parents?" Samuel said. "They would notice he was gone as soon as they came back from their own party." Remus and Samuel were sitting on another bed, putting them across from Andrea and Paul. Andrea handed the recorder to Remus and nodded, indicating that it was now his turn. Well, Dad, now it's my turn. Here's what I heard really happened when a kid entered the Iorian embassy. To begin with, it happened to a girl. Her name was Lisa Parker, and she didn't live anywhere near the embassy. Instead, she was from New York. Remus's story. Lisa Parker had slept like a brick. She and her entire classroom were touring places all over Washington, D.C., and it had left her exhausted. But now she was feeling much better. Still, she was nervous about the next place they were visiting. There were all sort of weird stories going around through the class about the Iorian embassy, and when you were 10, those stories mattered. It didn't help that her teacher, Miss Anders, was handing her a mask to keep the germs out. Lisa nodded and put the mask on. It wasn't easy because she had long red hair, but she managed. Then she joined the rest of the class. They were standing outside the embassy in pairs. Lisa ended up standing next to a boy called Fred Walters. His eyes were green like hers. But that was all they shared, so they didn't talk. Miss Anders gave a hand signal and they began walking. They entered the embassy and Lisa gasped. From the outside, it had looked like an ordinary brick building. But on the inside, it was very different. There were crystal lamps growing out of the walls. Alien drawings and writings adorned the walls, and the carpet was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen. She looked through doors that seemed to shimmer between being solid and translucent. Beyond, Iorians were busy with all sorts of things. Some were tending to flowers, others were cleaning, and one was typing at a crystalline laptop. They reached what looked like a big ballroom. A radio built into the mask crackled to life as Miss Anders began explaining about what the ballroom was for. That was when it happened, a tickle in her nose. She sniffed and it went away, but it came back stronger. Lisa tried to suppress it again. It was no good. She sneezed hard, and her mask cracked, allowing the Iorian air and germs in. She looked down at her hands, where all the veins were glowing with a strange purple energy. Worse, something blue and weird was growing on her skin. Lisa tried to scream, but it was already inside her windpipe. Then the strap of her mask snapped and it fell to the floor. It was the last thing Lisa Parker noticed. Wahoo! Lisa Parker mutated into something horrible with a taste for humanoid flesh, Remus said. The embassy guards had no other option but to shoot her dead. Next to him, Samuel was rolling his eyes. What? You have a reason my story isn't any good. Because all of the other kids would have talked to newspaper or television people. There's no way they could keep something like that quiet, Samuel said, which Andrea and Paul backed up with a nod. And then there is all the school people who would have wanted an explanation. And don't forget about Lisa's parents. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, he gave Samuel the recorder. Your turn, Doc. Everybody called Samuel Doc because of what Grandpa Sam had done for a living. It was fitting because of all of them, he had the highest grades in biology and science. He took a deep breath and began telling his story. It was about a boy called Elias Ward. Samuel's story. Elias Ward was 11 years old. He had brown eyes and short, brown hair. He lived with his father, John, in a small apartment 3 streets away from the Iorian embassy. Elias' mother, Sarah, had died when he was 3, so it was just the two of them. His father had been working at the embassy for 4 years now. He cleaned and polished things. Today was a Saturday, so he had been enjoying a day without school when he had noticed that John had forgotten his lunch. So here he was, approaching an alien embassy with his father's lunchbox in his hands. There were 2 stern-looking guards standing at the entrance. Elias swallowed, but they didn't stop him. So he kept walking and found himself in a small lobby. There were 3 counters with Iorian officials behind them. Elias took a deep breath and approached one of them. The lady behind it gave him a smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I am Elias Ward. My father, John Ward, works here." He held up the lunchbox. "He forgot his food. He can't eat yours." She took out an electronic pad and typed something into it. The device seemed to be running some kind of program, then beeped. The lady nodded, then touched her left ear. She said something in her language that Elias couldn't make out. But he realized that she was talking into some kind of microscopic radio. There was a pause as she got an answer from whoever she was talking to. Then she nodded. "Oh, please stay there." She left the room behind the window. Then, suddenly, she opened up a hidden door that Elias hadn't even noticed when he had come in. It was designed to look like just another piece of wall. She gestured for him to walk through, and he did. As the door closed behind him, he realized it was one of those fire doors that only opened from one side. They were standing in a utility corridor. He followed the lady to a door marked maintenance. "Oh, this is where you need to be," she said, pointed to the door, then she left. He opened the door and went inside, but the room was nothing like what he expected. It was massive, and there were rows of people there, all standing on odd glowing discs. They were all staring ahead, their eyes blank. He found his dad dropping the lunch box as he ran towards him and waved his hand in front of his dad's face, but there was no response. He grabbed his dad's shoulders and shook him. Again, no response. "Oh, Dad," Elias yelled. "Your father can't hear you," a smiley voice said. Elias turned to see a bunch of Iorian doctors in lab coats. The leader, who was really old and wrinkly, had been the one talking. "The mind control chips make sure of that, and they'll make sure that you obey us too." That was when Elias noticed the row of discs at rear of the room. All the other rows had adults, but this one had only children. He didn't recognize them all. But there was Jake from his math class, Lisa from German, and Marcus from wooden working, and between Marcus and Lisa was an empty disc. His stomach sank as he realized that he had walked into a trap. He ran for the door, but it was locked, so he pounded on it and screamed for help. "It's no good, human. You are ours now," the leader said. Then 2 enormous Iorians grabbed him and dragged him away from the door. Oahu. And that's what really happens to humans who enter the Iorian embassy, Samuel said, finishing his story. There was a moment of silence as he handed the recorder back to Andrea. "Anyway, Dad, those are the stories we've heard," she paused, looking at her brothers. "So, we're a bit nervous about meeting them. We love you, Dad. We miss you. Please send back a message as soon as can. We want to know about your adventures in space. Bye." She turned the recorder off and handed it back to Grandma Hoku. Grandma told them to get ready for bed and nobody objected. Andrea realized that she was feeling really, really tired, and her brothers were probably feeling the same. After she had brushed her teeth and changed into the pajamas Dad had gotten her for her last birthday, she crawled into bed. She hoped that Dad would have some answers. Then sleep took her. To be continued.